I had always known my family had a habit of leaving me out of things, but this time, they outdid themselves. It started when I overheard my cousin Jake talking excitedly about the upcoming cruise. 7 days of pure relaxation, he bragged. I laughed, assuming he was joking. "Oh yeah?" I asked. "When's the big trip?" He gave me a strange look. Next week." I frowned. Nobody had mentioned a cruise to me. Not once. "Wait, who's going?" Jake rattled off a long list of names. My mom. My sister, Lauren, and her husband. My aunts, uncles, cousins. Basically the entire family. Everyone except me. I felt the blood drain from my face. "I wasn't invited?" Jake hesitated. "I thought you knew." He trailed off, suddenly avoiding my gaze. That's when I realized this wasn't some last-minute oversight. This was intentional. Determined to get answers, I called my mom. "Why wasn't I invited to the cruise?" I asked, forcing my voice to stay even. "Oh, sweetheart," she sighed like I was being difficult. "It's not a big deal. You know how these things are. Planning gets messy." I clenched my jaw. "Messy? Everyone else was invited except me." There was a pause. Then she said, "Well, someone needed to stay behind and help with the kids." My stomach twisted. "Excuse me?" "Lauren and the others thought it would be best if you watched the little ones," she explained, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "You're the most responsible, and you don't have children of your own. It just made sense." It just made sense. Like I had no life, no desires, no importance beyond being the designated babysitter. I gripped the phone tighter. "So let me get this straight. You all planned a trip, excluded me, and assumed I'd be fine staying back to babysit?" "Don't be dramatic," she huffed. "We knew we could count on you." I hung up. My hands were shaking. This wasn't just a mistake. This was betrayal. Anger burned in my chest as I drove straight to my sister Lauren's house. If my mother wasn't going to give me a real answer, maybe she would. Lauren opened the door with a smile that instantly faded when she saw my expression. "What's wrong?" I didn't bother with pleasantries. "When were you planning to tell me about the cruise?" Her eyes flickered with something. Guilt, maybe. But she quickly masked it. "Mom told you, huh?" She sighed. "Look, it's not what you think." "Oh, really?" I crossed my arms. "Because it seems like everyone's going on a luxury vacation while I stay behind to be the unpaid nanny." Lauren's lips pressed into a thin line. "It's not like that." "Then what is it like?" I challenged. "Explain it to me." She exhaled sharply. "You know how expensive these trips are. We had to make cuts somewhere. And, well, you don't have kids. You don't have a husband. It just made sense." There it was again. That same phrase. It just made sense. I let out a bitter laugh. "Right. Because my time, my happiness, means nothing as long as I'm useful to the family?" Lauren groaned. "Why are you making this such a big deal? We trust you. You're good with kids. You always help out. We just assumed that I'd drop everything for you?" I cut in. "Did it ever cross your mind to ask me?" She rolled her eyes. "You're overreacting." "Am I?" I scoffed. "Tell me something, Lauren. If I had kids, would you have left me out?" She didn't answer. That silence told me everything. I took a step back. "I'm not watching your kids." Her face hardened. "Well, we already booked everything. There's no more space." I gave her a cold smile. "Then you better find someone else to babysit." For the first time, she looked uncertain. But I didn't wait for her response. I turned and walked away, feeling something new for the first time in years. Resolve. I barely made it home before my phone started buzzing. It was my mom. I ignored it. Then Lauren. Then my aunt. I let the calls go to voicemail. They could wait. I needed to breathe. When I finally picked up, it was my mom again. "Sweetheart," she said, her voice sugar-coated. "Lauren told me what happened. I know you're upset, But can we talk about this rationally? Rationally, I repeated. Mom, do you even hear yourself? You planned a family trip and left me out. That's not messy planning, that's deliberate. She sighed. It wasn't meant to hurt you. We needed someone we could trust with the kids. You mean someone who wouldn't complain, I corrected, because if I had a husband and kids, you wouldn't have even considered me. That's not fair, she said quickly. You know how much we rely on you. You're so responsible, so independent. We didn't think you'd mind. I let out a sharp laugh. You didn't think I'd mind being treated like a free babysitter? Yeah, shocking. I actually do. There was a beat of silence. Then I decided to test something. Fine, I said. If the issue is just the kids, I'll come on the cruise. I'll pay for my own ticket. The silence stretched. Well, Mom finally said, it's not that simple. The ship is fully booked. And besides, she hesitated. If you come, who will watch the kids? And there it was. Not my problem, I said coldly. Don't be selfish, she snapped. Everyone is counting on you. I felt something inside me harden. You know what, Mom? You're right. I am independent, which means I don't owe any of you anything. Before she could respond, I hung up. They had made their choice. Now, I was making mine. I wasn't going to waste another second begging for a seat at a table where I was never welcome. If they wanted to leave me behind, fine. But I wouldn't be sitting at home, waiting for them to return. I opened my laptop and started searching. I didn't want a crowded resort or a last-minute trip with friends. I wanted peace, solitude, a place where no one could dump responsibilities on me. Then I found it. A secluded mountain cabin, tucked away in the middle of nowhere. No Wi-Fi, no cell service, just silence. Perfect. I booked it for the exact same week as their cruise. No explanations, no announcements. The next few days, I went about my routine as if nothing had changed. I ignored the passive-aggressive texts from Lauren and the guilt-tripping voicemails from my mother. My favorite was from my cousin, Megan. Hey, so I know there's some drama with the trip, but can you at least confirm where we should drop the kids off? We need to organize everything before we leave. I didn't respond. Instead, I packed. The night before their departure, I turned off my phone and set an early alarm. I left before sunrise, tossing my bags into my car and heading toward the mountains. As I drove, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Freedom. No nagging, no obligations, no being taken for granted. Just me, my thoughts, and an entire week of peace ahead. For once, they would have to handle their own responsibilities. And I would finally be putting myself first. The morning of the cruise, I woke up to my phone vibrating nonstop. Even though I had turned it off the night before, I knew what was happening the moment I powered it back on. Missed calls, dozens of them. Lauren, Mom, Megan, even my uncle, who never called me unless he needed something. I sighed and scrolled through the flood of messages. Lauren, hey, where are you? Mom said she couldn't reach you. Megan, the kids are getting dropped off in an hour. Let us know if you need anything. Mom, why aren't you answering? Everyone is waiting. Don't do this to your family. I stared at the screen, a slow smirk forming on my lips. Don't do this to your family. The audacity. I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat and pulled onto the highway. The mountains were calling, and I had no intention of missing my own trip. As I drove, more messages kept coming. Mom, Lauren is panicking. The kids don't have anywhere to go. Jake, dude, what's going on? Everyone's freaking out. Just tell them where to drop the kids off. And my personal favorite from my cousin Chris. You know, technically, this is abandonment. Someone could report you. I laughed out loud at that one. Abandonment? As if I had ever agreed to watch their kids in the first place. By the time I reached the base of the mountain, my phone had rung so many times that I finally put it on airplane mode. The last thing I saw before cutting off the outside world was one final message from my mother. "You're being so selfish. I hope you can live with yourself after this." Oh, I could. In fact, I was about to live better than I ever had. I took a deep breath of the crisp mountain air, parked my car, and grabbed my bags. The silence was immediate, comforting. As I stepped into my cabin, I smiled. For the first time in my life, their problems were not mine to solve. The first morning in the cabin, I woke up to complete and utter silence. No ringing phone, no frantic texts, no demands. Just the sound of the wind rustling through the trees and the distant call of birds outside my window. I stretched, feeling lighter than I had in years. There was no rush to get up, no screaming kids, no last-minute favors disguised as family obligations. I brewed myself a cup of coffee and stepped onto the porch, letting the crisp mountain air fill my lungs. For the first time in forever, I wasn't needed. I wasn't expected to drop everything for someone else. And it felt amazing. The days passed in a blur of pure relaxation. I read books I had been putting off for months, took long walks through the trails, sat by the fireplace, wrapped in a blanket, with no one asking me to do a single thing for them. Occasionally, I'd think about the chaos I had left behind. I imagined Lauren and the others scrambling at the last minute to find babysitters, realizing too late that they had built their entire trip on an assumption that I would always be there to pick up the slack. I wondered if they were regretting their decision, if they had finally realized I wasn't their personal safety net. Then I'd shake the thought away, because for the first time, I wasn't worrying about them. I was worrying about me, and I wasn't going to waste another second of this trip feeling guilty for finally choosing myself. The moment I drove back into town, I knew I was in for a mess. As soon as I turned my phone back on, the notifications flooded in. Voicemails, texts, missed calls, and none of them were friendly. Lauren, I hope you're happy. You completely screwed us over. Mom, we need to talk. Call me immediately. Megan, wow, just wow. I sighed, parked in front of my apartment, and braced myself. I barely had time to put my keys down before my phone rang. Mom, I considered ignoring it, but I knew she wouldn't stop. I picked up. Hello? She didn't even say hi. Do you have any idea what you've done? I rolled my eyes. Oh, I don't know, Mom. Taken a much-needed vacation? You abandoned your family, she hissed. Lauren was in tears trying to find someone last minute. The whole trip was nearly ruined because of you. I scoffed. No, Mom. The trip was nearly ruined because you all assumed I'd be your unpaid babysitter. That's not on me. She didn't like that. How could you be so selfish? I let out a dry laugh. Selfish? You planned a family trip behind my back and left me out because you thought my time was better spent taking care of your responsibilities. And I'm the selfish one? Before she could respond, another voice cut in. Lauren. She must have grabbed the phone. You left us hanging, she snapped. Do you know how humiliating it was to beg for last-minute help? Oh, so you had other options, I said. Guess that means I was never your only choice. You just didn't want to put in the effort until you had no other choice. She spluttered, but I was done. Next time, maybe consider inviting me as family instead of treating me as free labor. And with that, I hung up. I wasn't playing their game anymore. After hanging up on Lauren, I sat in silence for a moment, letting everything sink in. They weren't upset because I had done something wrong. They were upset because, for the first time, I had refused to be used. And I knew, deep down, that if I didn't set firm boundaries now, this would never stop. So, I made a decision. One by one, I started muting conversations, blocking numbers where necessary. Not out of spite, but out of self-preservation. Mom? Muted. Lauren? Blocked. Cousin Megan? Blocked. Even my uncle, who had the nerve to call me irresponsible when I wasn't the one who left kids stranded? Blocked. The only person I didn't cut off was my Aunt Diane, the one whose retirement they had been celebrating. She was the only one who hadn't reached out to guilt-trip me, and I had a feeling she had no idea what had happened. With my phone blessedly quiet for the first time in days, I took a deep breath. I had spent my entire life saying yes to this family, being the reliable one, the responsible one, the one who sacrificed her own plans because it was easier for everyone else. Not anymore. If they wanted to be mad, let them. If they wanted to talk about me, let them. I didn't care. Because for the first time, I wasn't bending over backward to keep the peace. I was choosing myself, and it felt damn good. A few days later, I got a call from Aunt Diane. Unlike the others, she hadn't bombarded me with messages or guilt trips. That alone made me pick up. "Hey, kiddo," she said gently. "How are you holding up?" I let out a short laugh. "Better than the rest of the family, I assume." She sighed. "I heard there was drama." "That's one way to put it," I muttered. There was a pause. Then she asked, "Why weren't you on the cruise?" I blinked. "Wait, you didn't know?" "No one said a word about you not coming," she admitted. "I just assumed you were busy with work or didn't want to go." I felt my stomach twist. So they hadn't even told her I was excluded. I took a deep breath and told her everything. How the family had planned the trip behind my back. How they had expected me to stay behind and babysit. How, when I refused, they turned on me. Aunt Diane was silent for a moment. Then she sighed. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. If I had known, I would have said something." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "It's not your fault. But yeah, that's why I wasn't there." "Well," she said, her voice firm, "they had no right to do that to you. And if they're mad at you now, that's their problem." Hearing that from her, one of the only people in the family I actually respected, felt like a weight lifting off my chest. "Thanks, Aunt Diane," I said, meaning it. "For what?" she asked. "For being the only one who actually sees me." With my family cut off and my phone finally silent, I found myself experiencing something unfamiliar. Peace. Real, uninterrupted peace. No last-minute favors. No guilt trips. No being treated like I existed only to serve everyone else. For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying their weight on my shoulders, and honestly, it felt amazing. I spent the next few days focusing on myself. I started making plans, my plans, without wondering how they'd affect anyone else. I looked into traveling, taking up new hobbies, even moving to a different city where I wouldn't have to deal with the constant expectations of being the responsible one. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized something. They weren't mad that I left them stranded. They were mad that I had finally said no. Because the second I stopped making their lives easier, they had to face the reality of their own responsibilities. And they hated that. I didn't regret a single thing. But still, part of me wondered, was I too harsh? Should I have at least warned them that I wasn't going to be around? Would that have been the right thing to do? Then again, would they have warned me if I hadn't overheard their plans? Or would they have just dropped the kids off at my doorstep, assuming I'd take them in without question? I think we all know the answer. So now I'll ask you. Was I the jerk for walking away and letting them deal with the mess they created? Or was it finally time for me to stop being their doormat?